intlx Solutions, founded by engineers, valued for our expertise. What's up, guys? Let's learn something new today. We're going to take on Active Directory heads on. Let's get our hands into the labs and learn how we can integrate Active Directory with System Manager to make the manual process of user additions and deletions a thing of the past. Now, if you're not familiar with Active Directory, don't worry. I'm going to give you a tour of what Active Directory is. We'll build some users in Active Directory, look at how we can use Active Directory PowerShell to test LDAP filters, which we will use when configuring Active Directory synchronization on Avaya or a System Manager. Now, my lab AD is running on Windows Server 2019, and we're going to start in Server Manager. We'll drop down our tools and select Active Directory users and computers, and the first thing we're going to want to do is add some users into Active Directory. But before I do that, let's take a look at a couple of these objects in AD. At the top of this tree-like structure is my root node, labwarzone.com. Underneath that is my first OU or organizational unit called Avaya, another called Lab Computers, another OU called Lab Users, and lastly an OU called Roles, which contains my security groups. Now, as you can see, these OUs look like folders, and that's a good way to think about them. They're used to separate objects in AD, and the first and only object that we'll do within this exercise is our users. So let's go ahead and add our first user. While selecting my Lab Users folder, I'll right-click in the white space here. I'll select New, and then User. Now I'm going to add my users by order of toughness, and there's nobody tougher than Mr. Norris, so Chuck will be our first user. Setting up users pretty straightforward. First name, last name, login name. We'll go ahead and click Next. We'll type in the password that the user will utilize to access their AD resources, such as computer accounts. I'll uncheck Change Password, and check Password never expires since this is just my lab. Convenience over security today. We'll click Next, review our settings, and then choose Finish. Next, we're going to want to click on our new user, then choose Properties. Here you can see a number of items we can set up for our users, and the ones that are important in this example are our telephone number in E164 format, an email address, there we go, and a description, which is the field that we'll be using actually in System Manager to map our user provisioning rules in System Manager, and we'll see a lot of that shortly. I'll be adding my user to my AADS users group, and that's because my LDAP filter that we'll be seeing shortly will actually be polling against any users who are a member of this group. There we go. We'll select Apply and OK because we have all the settings that we need here, and I'll repeat this process for each of my new users. Let's go ahead and add them in now. Okay, we've got our users added. Now let's work on building out an LDAP filter, and we can actually test these filters out in Active Directory's PowerShell to make sure we get the expected results we're looking for. And we'll use this filter when we set up our directory synchronization in System Manager. Now there's an infinite combination of possibilities we could employ with PowerShell, but let's filter out on something simple. Using the getAD object command with the LDAP filter switch, I'm going to use some wildcards to look for my name. And we can see here that we got a hit on CN equals William St. Germain. Let's move our eyes over to the DC equals COM. If we climb up this AD tree, we start at COM, then LabWarzone, which makes up my domain, labwarzone.com, and then after that we see an Avaya folder, and then our Lab Users folder, and then inside of that folder is User William St. Germain. So it's kind of neat to see how the structure comes together when we climb up that tree to construct our LDAP filter. Now, if we wanted to see what users were in our AADS users group, we could use the netgroup command followed by the group name, and then follow that by /domain to view the groups on this DC's current domain. Now we can see we have the 4 users that we just added. Great, kind of expected to see those, but we also see one user that's unwanted, and quite honestly, I forgot about this user, so let's go find Mathers and delete them. To do this, I'll navigate back to Active Directory users and computers, and you can see that I've opened up my roles OU here, and there's my AADS users group. I'm going to right click on the group, select the members tab, and I could simply remove him from this group, but I'd really like to delete the user altogether. I can see that this user lives in the IP Office folder, so let's close this out, and I'll navigate to the IP Office folder. Okay, so there's the Mathers account. I'll highlight the user, then I'll click this red X to delete them. Now moving back over to PowerShell, let's rerun the command again. And perfect. You can see that the user no longer shows up in our AADS users group. Now let's build out the filter we'll be applying in System Manager. Again, using the getADObject LDAP filter command, and let me paste the filter in that I've already built because there's no point in typing that out manually again. And at first glance, this command looks pretty scary, right? But it's not that bad though. Let's break it down into its components. First, let's talk about the special symbols. We have two in this example. The ampersand, which means and all conditions must be met inside the brackets, and the bang symbol, or not. The condition must not be met. So in this example, we see a bit of information with an equals 2 at the end of it, and that means the account is disabled. And what we're saying here is that the filter must not include accounts that are disabled. But we do want to include the object category person, and who is also a member of the AADS users group. Now what this filter string is doing is telling us how to get to this group, and we do so by starting at the top of the node labwarzone.com, then move to the Avaya OU, then the roles OU, and that's where we're going to find our AADS users group. Let's hit enter and see what that returns. And yes, there's all the users we built, so this filter checks out for me because it's grabbing the precise information that I need. Now let's explore disabled accounts in action. I'm going to move back over to AD Users and Computers, click on Chuck Norris, then I'm going to right click his name and select Disable Account. Now back over on PowerShell, I'll select the up arrow to bring our command back and then hit enter. Now you can see that Chuck Norris is no longer appearing when queried by our LDAP filter, and that's because the account is disabled and our filter excludes disabled accounts. Now if I go back over, and we'll re-enable Mr. Norris's account. There we go. Then I'll run that same command again, and we can see Chuck is once again populating in our query. Okay, let's finish up this job by moving over to System Manager. And we'll start by building our extension templates that System Manager will use when it automatically builds our users. Start by navigating to Services, then Templates, and then choose CM Endpoint. We're running CM 8.1, so we'll choose that for our server version, and with that selected, the new option becomes available, so let's select that. Now the data that you're going to put in here is going to be specific to your environment, and if you're not familiar with these fields, check out my video on how to add a SIP station. Now I'm not going to go over all of the fields in here, so let's just zip through and get this endpoint template created that's going to be used for all of our extensions. With our endpoint template now built, we're ready to build our user provisioning rule, and we'll do so by heading over to Users, then select User Provisioning Rule. Now right here we'll select New, and again, if you're not familiar with these fields, please check out my How to Add a SIP Station video. Nearly all of the fields you'll see in here will be identical to what you would actually be entering when building a SIP user manually. First, the user provisioning rule name needs to match my description, which in my case ties to the AD users description field. Remember, we populated this when building our user in AD users and computers. Next, the SIP domain used by endpoints for registration. Then the communication profile password, which is the password used by the SIP extension for registration. And lastly, user phone number last, which will match my 4-digit dial plan. You know what, I'll also populate my language preference and time zone. Then I'll move over to my communication profile tab, and here we'll enter in the session manager details that the SIP station will use for primary and secondary registration. Then how many devices will be simultaneously registered against this single extension or any single extension. Our application sequencing for our communication manager features. And lastly, the home location of the device. Now let's move over to our CM endpoint profile section, choose our CM system, then select the CM endpoint template we created when we first logged into System Manager. There's no need for a security code for SIP-only extensions. And because I'm now using Breeze Presence in my lab, I'm going to move to that section and choose Breeze Presence for the presence profile. And with that all populated, I'm fairly satisfied with what I have set here, so I'll click Commit. We only have to do this one time in my case, though you could build out additional rules to segregate your administration by location, department, or really any identification you use to distinguish your groups of employees. With our provisioning rule married with a CM endpoint template, we can begin the process of connecting System Manager to our AD server. Before we do that though, let's just take a peek at our SIP users, or lack thereof in this case. As you can see, there are no SIP users here. But after we connect System Manager to my Active Directory, you will see that change. And now actually, it's time to make that happen. So we'll go to Users, then Directory Synchronization. Once we're here, let's select New. So our data source name, we'll put in some value. I'll put in ADS users in my case. The host IP of our AD server, username and password to access Active Directory, over port 389, and my base distinguished name, I'll put in my domain, labwarzone.com, and I'll paste in that awesome filter we created back in PowerShell. I'll check off these two values, then I'll test my connection. Now if the connection succeeds, you'll get a drop down of our mappings that we'll want to set up. I won't read each of them, but I do want to point out the value that will map our users to our provisioning rule, which is that value of the description. Remember, the description is Avaya, so our user will map out against my Avaya provisioning rule because that is what I've set up in the description field of my Active Directory. You want to map out your provisioning rule based on which field in AD makes the most sense in your unique situation. Let's go ahead and select Save. Then the next thing we need to do is to set up a job for when we want our synchronization to occur, date, time, etc. And we'll set the job to run every day thereafter. After saving that, I'll hit Create New Job again, this time running it immediately so it will pull down my new users. If we switch over to the Job History tab, we can see that the job is running, and if we hit the swirly blue arrows to refresh our page, we can see that the job has completed. Now let's take a closer look at that job summary. We'll see that 4 users were added, and if we drop down the red triangle, we can see that it is the 4 users that we created earlier in Active Directory. Let's go over to our User Management tab and see how everything looks. It's looking great. Our 4 users are present. We have our SIP handle, email, first and last names look great. Now let's go ahead and open one of these users up. And here we can see that our communication profile was set properly. Our session manager profile looks good. And if we look at the CM endpoint profile, it looks good too. Let's navigate to the communication manager section. And we can see that everything that we built in our CM endpoint profile template is present. Now the last thing that we'll cover is user deletion. As an Active Directory administrator, we'll eventually be asked to delete some users. And I'll go ahead and delete all of the users that I created. It's simple enough. In Active Directory, we select the user and then choose the big red X to delete the user. Now, if we go back over to System Manager and perform another synchronization, we'll let that job run, and there we go, it's completed. And if we click on that job summary again, we can now see that all 4 users were deleted. We can confirm that by moving back over to User Management. We'll refresh our page, and like magic, our users have been deleted. And I should note, it deletes the users from everywhere. There is no need to pull down the More Actions, Show Deleted Users. Once the sync is done, the users are permanently deleted everywhere.
intlx Solutions, empowering people, connecting businesses.